It's really hard to comprehend it because in 15 years, it's hard to comprehend that happening. You know,
They say a man's final wish carries the weight of his entire life. And for Elvis Presley, that wish was never simple. In the summer of 1977, the air around Graceland felt heavy, not just with the Memphis heat, but with something unspoken. Elvis was restless. He walked the halls late at night, talking to the portraits on the walls, whispering things only God could hear. His closest friends would later say he'd begun talking about home in a different way. Not fame, not Graceland, but the kind of home that can't be found on this earth. Elvis was only 42, but he looked like a man who'd lived 3 lifetimes. The pills, the pressure, the loneliness, they all took their toll. Yet even through the exhaustion, he held on to one quiet, private promise. A promise about where he wanted to rest when his time came. He spoke of it one night to his father, Vernon, after walking through the meditation garden. "Daddy," he said softly, "when I go, don't put me in Hollywood. Don't ship me off somewhere fancy. I want to be close to Mama." Gladys Presley's death had broken him in ways the world never truly saw. She was buried in Forest Hill Cemetery in Memphis, and Elvis visited that grave every chance he got. Sometimes he'd arrive after midnight, sitting alone by her tombstone for hours. To him, that spot wasn't just sacred, it was the last place he'd ever felt peace. So when he made that promise to his father, to rest near his mother, to stay rooted in Memphis soil, Vernon nodded, fighting tears. He gave his word. Elvis believed it would be honored. But just weeks later, on that August morning, the world changed forever. The headlines screamed, "Elvis Presley dead at 42." And within hours, that promise began to unravel. The funeral was chaos. Thousands outside Graceland's gates, sobbing, shouting, singing. Vernon was drowning in decisions, surrounded by Colonel Parker's people, lawyers and family members pulling him in every direction. He wanted to protect his son, but he also wanted to protect what was left of their world. Elvis was laid to rest at Forest Hill Cemetery, right beside his mother, just as he wanted. For a brief moment, that promise was kept. But something about it felt unfinished, almost as if the earth itself couldn't hold him there for long. And it couldn't, because just weeks later, a chilling event would force the Presley family to make a choice. One that would change everything about where Elvis Presley rests to this day. It began with fear. In the stillness of a Memphis night, someone tried to steal Elvis Presley's body. Grave robbers, armed with tools and flashlights, had broken into Forest Hill Cemetery. The attempt failed, but the message was clear. Even in death, Elvis wasn't safe. Vernon was shaken to his core. He was already haunted by grief, but this was different. He couldn't bear the thought of his son's grave being violated. And so began the conversations that would move Elvis's body. The same conversations that would break the promise Elvis once made about where he wanted to rest. Priscilla flew in from California. She'd always said she could feel Elvis's spirit at Graceland, as if he'd never truly left. When Vernon told her the plan to bring Elvis home, to bury him inside the walls of Graceland itself, she hesitated. She remembered that letter Elvis had written years earlier, tucked away in his private Bible. In it, he'd written, "When I'm gone, don't make a show of it. Keep me close to Mama. That's all I ask." That small line, written in his own hand, became the heart of the family's greatest argument. On one side, Vernon and the security team insisted that Graceland was the only place safe enough, private, protected, sacred. On the other, some family members whispered that moving him would dishonor his final wish. But time was short and threats were real. The cemetery was crawling with reporters and fans. Vernon made the call. Elvis and his mother would both be moved, together. In late October of 1977, under the cover of darkness, the bodies of Elvis and Gladys Presley were quietly relocated to Graceland. Few people knew the exact night. It was meant to be secret, respectful. But for Vernon, it was a night filled with guilt. He'd broken his son's word to keep him at Forest Hill. Afterward, he would tell friends he believed Elvis forgave him. "He's home now," Vernon said softly, standing at the new gravesite in the meditation garden. "This is where he belongs." Priscilla tried to accept it, but she kept that letter, folded, worn, sacred, as a reminder of the man beneath the legend. The man who still longed to rest near the woman who raised him. Years later, when Graceland opened to the public, that garden became more than a burial site. It became a pilgrimage. Fans came from every corner of the world, bringing tears, prayers, and songs. They believed Elvis's soul lingered there, protecting the place he loved. But even then, whispers persisted that maybe Elvis never wanted this, that he never wanted his grave to become a museum piece. And as the decades passed, new documents would emerge, papers hinting that Graceland's decision was never meant to be permanent. Something deeper was still unfinished, something hidden. And when that truth finally came to light, it would bring Graceland to tears. It began quietly, just a few lines in a press release from Graceland. At first, most people barely noticed, but within hours, it was everywhere. News outlets, fan pages, radio hosts, all repeating the same haunting phrase: a reevaluation of the Presley family resting place. For millions who'd walked that meditation garden in silence, it hit like thunder. What could that possibly mean? Was Elvis being moved again? Was something found? The official statement didn't give much away, only that a private review of the gravesite had been ordered, involving structural assessment, preservation work, and the examination of archival burial records. But it wasn't the words that shook fans. It was what they implied. For decades, Graceland had been treated as holy ground. The idea of disturbing it, even for preservation, felt unthinkable. Yet behind closed doors, something deeper was happening. According to insiders, the Presley estate had received new information, a rediscovered set of documents from 1977 that contradicted parts of the official burial record. The papers suggested that during the midnight relocation from Forest Hill, a symbolic substitution had taken place. Not deception, protection. Vernon Presley, they said, had ordered a safeguard measure, ensuring that if anyone ever tried again to disturb Elvis's grave, they would never truly find what they sought. The announcement reignited one of the oldest rumors in music history, that Elvis's resting place wasn't what the world believed it to be. Priscilla was said to be deeply emotional during the meeting when these records were first presented. One witness claimed she left the room in tears, whispering, "He never wanted this to be spectacle, just peace." For her, this wasn't about conspiracy. It was about heartbreak, about promises broken and peace disturbed again after nearly 50 years. The estate's decision to go public was not unanimous. Some wanted to keep the review quiet to avoid fan hysteria, but others argued the truth, however painful, belonged to history. So, the statement was released. And within days, thousands gathered outside the gates of Graceland. They lit candles, left letters, and sang softly into the Memphis night. Old fans who had stood outside those same gates in 1977 came again, gray-haired now, but carrying the same grief. Younger fans, born long after his death, came too, drawn by something spiritual. They said the air felt different that week, heavier, quieter, as if even the walls of Graceland were holding their breath. Meanwhile, historians and journalists scrambled to verify the claim. They requested access to the documents, cross-checked cemetery logs, and compared signatures. Some found small inconsistencies, dates that didn't match, initials that weren't. Vernon's others insisted it proved nothing. But to Elvis's true believers, proof didn't matter. They knew one thing. Elvis never wanted his grave to be a spectacle. He wanted privacy, even in death. And if Vernon had done something, anything, to protect that peace, they believed it was done out of love. In a quiet press conference held days later, a Graceland representative stepped to the microphone, voice trembling slightly. "We understand the emotion this has caused. The Presley family's wish, and always will be, that Elvis rest with dignity. The review is to preserve, not disturb." Then came the part that made the world stop. "We can confirm the presence of a sealed capsule beneath the Presley family memorial, placed there in 1977 at the instruction of Vernon Presley. It will remain unopened." That was all they said, but it was enough. Tears filled the crowd outside. Reporters tried to shout questions, but no one answered. The capsule, what was in it? Why was it sealed? No one knew. Only that it had been placed there the same night Elvis's body was moved from Forest Hill. In that moment, the meaning of the meditation garden shifted forever. It wasn't just a gravesite anymore. It was a message, one left by a father who loved his son so fiercely he'd rewrite history to keep him safe. The announcement ended with one final line: "Elvis Aaron Presley will remain where he has always belonged, here at home at Graceland." But those who stood there that night said something changed in the air when the words were read. Some swore they heard faint music drifting from the mansion windows. Others said it was only the wind through the oaks. Either way, no one left untouched, because the question now wasn't where Elvis rested. It was what he left behind beneath that marble stone. In the days after that announcement, the world couldn't stop talking about the capsule beneath Elvis Presley's grave. Fans speculated endlessly. Some believed it held a lock of his mother's hair. Others said it contained a private letter written by Elvis himself. But those closest to the family said the truth was far more sacred and far more heartbreaking. The capsule, they whispered, wasn't just a tribute, it was a covenant between a father and son. A quiet promise that no matter how loud the world became, some things would remain untouched. One of Elvis's cousins, Billy Smith, later said in an interview that Vernon had gone to the meditation garden the morning after the reburial, long before it was open to the public. He stood there alone, beside that fresh marble, holding something wrapped in a faded blue cloth. A Bible said to have been Elvis's since his teenage years, pages marked with handwritten notes, underlined verses, and prayers scrawled in his own messy script. That Bible, along with a folded letter written in Vernon's hand, was sealed inside the capsule. Vernon told no one what the letter said, but those who knew him said he couldn't look at the grave without his eyes filling with tears. It was as if that sealed capsule carried not just Elvis's memory, but his father's apology. For years, the story stayed hidden within family whispers. Visitors came, tours passed through, and every day, flowers were placed over that very spot, the one where the capsule slept beneath the marble. None of them knew that under those roses and prayers lay a father's silent plea for forgiveness. But time has a way of uncovering what the heart tries to hide. When Lisa Marie Presley began spending more time at Graceland in her later years, she reportedly grew curious about those same stories. She'd been told bits and pieces as a child, how her grandfather had left something behind for her father. When she learned of the capsule's existence, she asked to see the original documents confirming it. According to one longtime staff member, Lisa wept when she read the notes. She didn't ask for the capsule to be opened. Instead, she left her own message. A handwritten letter sealed in plastic, placed beneath the marble near her father's grave. A message only he would ever know. After Lisa Marie's passing, her daughter Riley spoke briefly to the press, saying, "Everything at Graceland is exactly as it should be." To fans, it sounded like a simple reassurance, but to those who knew the family history, it carried something deeper. The sense that the Presley story had finally come full circle. Still, not everyone found peace in the mystery. Journalists and self-proclaimed Elvis truth seekers launched investigations, hunting for clues about the capsule's contents. Some claimed they had leaked documents proving Vernon included an unrecorded will. Others said it contained a confession about the publishing rights that tore Elvis apart. None of it could be verified. But to the people who truly loved Elvis, those theories missed the point. They didn't need to know what was inside. They only needed to know why it was placed there. Elvis had lived his entire life surrounded by noise, cameras, contracts, crowds. The capsule, in its quiet secrecy, was the one thing that belonged entirely to him and his family. It was their final act of protection, a spiritual lockbox holding the last unbroken bond between father, son, and mother. Pastor Bob Joyce once spoke about it during a sermon without naming names. He said, "Sometimes the greatest truth isn't what you dig up, it's what you choose to let rest." Many believe he was referring to that very capsule. And maybe he was right. Because what lies beneath Elvis's grave isn't a secret waiting to be exposed. It's a symbol of what can't be destroyed: love, loyalty, and the human need for redemption. Today, when fans walk through the meditation garden, they often stop in silence at the foot of Elvis's stone. Some feel an odd sense of warmth, as if the air itself hums with something unseen. They can't explain it, but maybe that's the point. Elvis once said, "Truth is like a song. You can't always hear it, but you can always feel it." And if you stand long enough in that garden, surrounded by roses, wind, and the echoes of gospel, you start to feel it too. That maybe the real story of Elvis Presley isn't about fame or mystery or the capsule beneath his name. Maybe it's about a man who, even after the lights went out, still managed to find his way home. Because the secret buried beneath that marble isn't something you can dig up. It's something you can only understand. When you realize that peace for Elvis was never about the stage or the spotlight. It was about finally being still, finally being heard, and finally being home. In the months after the announcement, Graceland changed, not in its walls or gardens, but in its spirit. Visitors said it felt softer, quieter, as if the place itself had exhaled after holding its breath for half a century. The revelation of the sealed capsule didn't just reopen old memories, it rewrote them. For decades, fans had come believing they were standing above a legend. Now they understood they were standing over a love story, one between a father and son, sealed forever beneath the marble. The mystery wasn't frightening anymore, it was comforting. Because it meant that Elvis's final resting place wasn't just about death, it was about devotion. News crews eventually packed up, historians filed their reports, and the world moved on. But something subtle lingered. People began returning to Graceland not out of curiosity, but reverence. They didn't come to chase rumors or search for secrets. They came to feel close to the man who gave his soul to the world and somehow kept his heart right here in Memphis. One morning, an elderly woman was interviewed near the meditation garden. She'd been there in '77, standing behind the iron gates the day Elvis died. Through tears, she said, "Back then, I came here because I lost my hero. Now I come because I found his peace." That peace became the new legacy of Graceland. The capsule, the announcement, the unanswered questions, they didn't tarnish Elvis's memory. They deepened it. They reminded people that beneath the rhinestones and headlines, there was a man who prayed before every show, who called his mother before every tour, who wept over the people he couldn't save. And maybe that's why Graceland endures. Because it's not really about the mansion or the music, it's about the humanity that echoes through both. Even now, when night falls over the garden, the soft lights shimmer across the gravestones of Elvis, Gladys, Vernon, and Lisa Marie. 4 names bound together by blood and faith. 4 lives that carried the weight of fame, love, and loss. And when the world grows quiet, it almost feels as if they're all finally resting together. To some, the revelation of the capsule was shocking. To others, it was healing. But to the people who've stood there, heads bowed, hearts trembling, it was something else entirely. Proof that even in death, Elvis never stopped protecting the people he loved. In a way, the story of that sealed capsule mirrors Elvis's life. Misunderstood, mysterious, but filled with meaning. You can speculate all you want about what's hidden inside, but maybe the real secret isn't what's buried. It's what still lives on. Because every time someone sings "Can't Help Falling in Love" under their breath, every time a mother rocks her child to "Love Me Tender," every time a stranger smiles at a photo of that boy from Tupelo who dreamed too big for his time, Elvis lives again. Not in marble, not in myth, but in the hearts of those who still believe that the man who changed the world never truly left it. Maybe that's what Vernon was trying to preserve when he sealed that capsule. Not mystery, but meaning. And maybe, just maybe, that's what Elvis wanted all along. To rest not just in peace, but in understanding. If you've ever stood at Elvis's grave, you know, it's more than stone and roses. It's a feeling that words can't quite hold. And if this story touched your heart, let it live on. Hit that like button to honor the man who gave his everything to the world. Subscribe for more stories that uncover the truth, the heartbreak, and the legacy behind the king. And before you go, tell us in the comments, do you believe Elvis finally found peace at Graceland? Or do you think his soul still walks those halls, protecting the home he built with love? Your words, your memories, your voice, they keep his spirit alive. Because long after the world moves on, Elvis Presley's story still whispers through time, reminding us that legends never truly die.
I tried to turn my back to that, but I just didn't want to share him. Simple as that. As much as he wanted to be married and have a family, I don't know if he was ever cut to be married.
What I'm about to tell you will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about Priscilla Presley and Elvis's marriage. Because while the world believed their divorce in 1973 was just another Hollywood breakup, the truth is far more devastating. Priscilla wasn't just moving on after Elvis, she was already cheating on him with another man while they were still married. His name was Michael Stone, and their affair began in 1972, a full year before Priscilla and Elvis officially divorced. Think about that for a second. While Elvis was performing his heart out in Vegas, believing his wife was supporting him at home, Priscilla was secretly building a relationship with another man. This wasn't some innocent emotional connection that developed over time. This was a calculated betrayal that may have triggered the king's final descent into darkness. Now, you might be thinking, how do we know this timeline is accurate? Because the evidence is right there in black and white. Priscilla's relationship with Michael Stone ran from 1972 to 1975. Her marriage to Elvis didn't end until October 1973. Do the math. That's at least a year of overlap, a year of lies, a year of Elvis living a complete illusion about his marriage. Picture Elvis during those final months of 1972 and early 1973. He's gaining weight. His performances are becoming erratic. He's increasingly paranoid and dependent on prescription drugs. Everyone blamed the pressures of fame, the isolation of stardom, the demands of his career. But what if the real poison was much closer to home? What if every night he came home to Graceland, he was looking into the eyes of a woman who was already emotionally and physically committed to someone else? The timeline tells a story that Hollywood has never wanted to acknowledge. Elvis's most dramatic physical and mental decline coincided exactly with Priscilla's secret affair. This wasn't coincidence, this was cause and effect. Elvis was an intuitive man, deeply sensitive despite his tough exterior. He knew something was wrong, even if he couldn't prove it. That gut-wrenching feeling of being betrayed by the person you trust most? That slow-burning realization that your entire life is built on a lie? That's what was eating Elvis alive from the inside out. And here's what makes this even more heartbreaking. Elvis genuinely believed he could win Priscilla back even after their divorce. He thought their separation was temporary, a rough patch they could work through. He had no idea that she'd already been emotionally checked out for over a year, that she'd already found his replacement before she even filed the papers. Michael Stone wasn't some random rebound. He was a deliberate choice, a calculated move by a woman who knew exactly what she was doing. While Elvis was pouring his heart out in songs like "It's Now or Never" and "Can't Help Falling in Love," believing those words still meant something to his wife, Priscilla was already planning her exit strategy with another man. The cruelest part? Elvis kept trying to be the perfect husband, even as his marriage was crumbling. He bought Priscilla expensive gifts, tried to include her in his world, begged her to come to his performances. But you can't compete with a secret affair when you don't even know you're in competition. Elvis was fighting for a marriage that had already ended in his wife's heart. This betrayal didn't just end a marriage, it destroyed a man's ability to trust. Think about Elvis's relationships after Priscilla. Short-lived, intense, but never leading to marriage again. The man who once believed in fairy tale romance became someone who could never fully commit to anyone else. Priscilla didn't just break his heart, she broke his capacity to love without fear. And the most tragic irony of all? Elvis died just 4 years after discovering the full truth about Priscilla's timeline of deception. 4 years of knowing that the woman he'd loved since she was 14, the mother of his only child, had played him for a fool during the most vulnerable period of his life. The official story says Elvis died of heart failure, but anyone who understands the human heart knows the truth. Sometimes, betrayal is more deadly than any drug, And sometimes, the people closest to us are the ones who destroy us most completely. But here's the thing that will absolutely blow your mind. Michael Stone was just the beginning of Priscilla's web of scandalous relationships, and her next choice would connect her to a family name that would eventually become the most famous in America. In 1975, just 2 years after destroying Elvis, Priscilla Presley made a move that would unknowingly reshape American pop culture forever. She began dating a young, ambitious Armenian-American lawyer named Robert Kardashian. Yes, you heard that right. Robert Kardashian, the future father of Kim, Khloe, Kourtney, and Rob Kardashian, the man who would later become famous as O.J. Simpson's defense attorney, was once romantically involved with Elvis Presley's ex-wife. This isn't just some random Hollywood connection. This relationship potentially planted the seeds for the entire Kardashian empire we know today. Think about it. Robert Kardashian in 1975 was already well connected in Los Angeles legal and business circles, but he wasn't yet the household name he'd become. Dating Priscilla Presley gave him direct access to entertainment industry royalty, to the inner workings of celebrity culture, and most importantly, to the art of turning personal drama into public fascination.
But here's where this gets really interesting. Priscilla wasn't just dating Robert Kardashian. She was learning from him. This was a woman who had just escaped one of the most controlling relationships in entertainment history, and now she was with a sharp, strategic thinker who understood how to navigate power structures in Hollywood. Robert Kardashian wasn't just her boyfriend. He was her education in how to build and protect wealth in the entertainment business. The timing of this relationship tells us everything about Priscilla's calculated approach to love. She just ended her affair with Michael Stone, and instead of taking time to heal or reflect, she immediately moved into the arms of another powerful man. But this time, she chose someone who could teach her things Elvis never could: how to be shrewd in business, how to protect assets, how to turn fame into lasting financial security. Robert Kardashian was building his legal career during this period, taking on high-profile clients and establishing the connections that would later make him one of Los Angeles's most sought-after attorneys. Through Priscilla, he gained insight into celebrity psychology, into how fame affects relationships, into the unique legal challenges that come with being in the public eye. Years later, when he was defending O.J. Simpson, he already understood how celebrity trials become entertainment spectacles. And what did Priscilla gain from this relationship? She learned how to be strategic about her public image, how to separate her personal brand from Elvis's legacy, and most crucially, how to turn her past into a business advantage rather than a burden. The Priscilla Presley who emerged from this relationship was sharper, more business-minded, and infinitely more calculating than the young woman who had once been completely dependent on Elvis. But here's the part that will absolutely shock you. This relationship may have influenced how the next generation of Kardashians approached fame itself. Robert Kardashian learned from Priscilla that personal drama, when handled correctly, doesn't destroy careers, it builds them. The woman who had survived being married to Elvis Presley, who had turned a messy divorce into a platform for independence, showed him that controversy and publicity could be assets rather than liabilities. Fast forward to the 2000s, and Robert Kardashian's children would become masters of exactly this strategy. Kim, Khloe, and Kourtney built an empire by turning their personal lives into public entertainment, by making their relationships and breakups into content, by understanding that in modern America, being talked about is more valuable than being respected. Sound familiar? That's the exact playbook Priscilla had been running since her divorce from Elvis. The connection goes even deeper when you consider that both Priscilla and the Kardashians understood something fundamental about American culture. People are obsessed with behind-the-scenes access to glamorous lives. Priscilla made a fortune giving tours of Graceland and sharing Elvis stories. The Kardashians made billions by literally filming their daily lives and selling that access to the public. This wasn't just a brief romantic relationship, this was a masterclass in how to monetize fame, and both parties learned lessons that would define their futures. Robert Kardashian gained the insights that would eventually help his children become the most famous family in America. Priscilla gained the business acumen that would help her transform from Elvis's widow into an entertainment mogul in her own right. But if you think dating a future Kardashian patriarch was Priscilla's most shocking romantic choice, you haven't heard anything yet. Because her next relationship would last 22 years, produce another child, and somehow remain almost completely hidden from the public eye, despite happening at the height of her fame. In 1984, while the world thought they knew everything about Priscilla Presley's love life, she pulled off the most incredible vanishing act in Hollywood history. She began a relationship that would last 22 years, produce her second child, and somehow remain almost completely invisible to the media and public. His name was Marco Garibaldi, and their secret love affair makes everything else in Priscilla's romantic timeline look like amateur hour. Marco wasn't some Hollywood insider or entertainment industry power player. He was a Brazilian computer programmer turned musician and producer, quiet, intellectual, and completely uninterested in the spotlight that had defined Priscilla's entire adult life. But here's what makes this relationship absolutely mind-blowing. Priscilla managed to keep this man hidden in plain sight for over 2 decades, while she was one of the most watched women in America. Think about what that means. This was the 1980s and 1990s, when paparazzi culture was exploding, when every detail of celebrity lives was being scrutinized and sold to tabloids. Priscilla was regularly appearing on television, giving interviews about Elvis, managing Graceland, and building her business empire. Yet somehow she kept a 22-year relationship and the birth of her son Navarone almost completely out of the public eye. But the most shocking part isn't just that she hid the relationship, it's why she needed to hide it. Marco Garibaldi was 22 years younger than Priscilla. When they got together in 1984, she was 39 and he was just 17 years old. Let that sink in for a moment. The woman who had been groomed by Elvis when she was 14 turned around and entered a relationship with a teenager when she was approaching 40. The parallels to her own story with Elvis are absolutely staggering, but with the power dynamics completely reversed. Now Priscilla was the older, established partner, introducing a much younger person to her world of wealth and celebrity. She was the one with all the control, all the experience, all the power. Marco was basically a kid when this relationship began, and Priscilla had become the predator. In the exact same pattern that had defined her own youth. And here's where this story gets even more complicated. Their son Navarone was born in 1987, just 3 years into their relationship. Priscilla was 42, Marco was barely 20. She'd created a family dynamic that mirrored her own childhood in the most disturbing way possible. Navarone grew up with a father who was practically still a kid himself, and a mother who controlled every aspect of their private world. But the secrecy around this relationship wasn't just about protecting Marco or their son from media attention. It was about protecting Priscilla's carefully crafted image as Elvis's devoted widow and Lisa Marie's dedicated mother. How would it look if the world knew she was living with a man young enough to be her son? How would that affect her credibility as the keeper of Elvis's legacy? The control Priscilla exercised over this relationship's privacy shows just how calculating she'd become. She learned to compartmentalize her life completely. Public Priscilla was the elegant widow and businesswoman, while private Priscilla was living with a man who was closer in age to her daughter, Lisa Marie, than to herself. And speaking of Lisa Marie, this secret relationship created a family dynamic that was absolutely toxic. Lisa Marie was dealing with her own struggles with identity and relationships, and her mother was secretly raising another child with a man who was barely older than Lisa Marie herself. The resentment and confusion this created within the Presley family has never been fully addressed publicly. But it explains so much about the distance between Priscilla and Lisa Marie in later years. The most revealing part of this entire 22-year saga is how it ended. In 2006, after more than 2 decades together, Priscilla simply walked away from Marco and their life together. No dramatic public breakup, no custody battle, no media circus. She just left. Marco faded back into obscurity, and Priscilla moved on to her next relationship, as if 22 years with this man had never happened. Every single man in Priscilla's life served a specific purpose in her evolution from vulnerable teenager to calculating businesswoman. She didn't just date these men, she extracted what she needed from each relationship and then moved on when they could no longer serve her goals. The most disturbing realization is that Priscilla has never had a genuine, equal romantic relationship in her entire life. Every partnership has been about power dynamics, strategic advantages, or filling specific needs. She learned early that relationships were transactions, and she's been treating them that way for over 50 years. This explains so much about the dysfunction in the Presley family, the distance between Priscilla and Lisa Marie, and the way Elvis's legacy has been commercialized and controlled. Priscilla didn't just inherit Elvis's estate, she turned his memory into a business strategy, just like she turned every relationship into a stepping stone toward more power and control. The woman the world sees as Elvis's devoted widow is actually one of the most calculating relationship strategists in Hollywood history. She spent decades perfecting the art of using people for personal gain while maintaining a public image of elegance and grace. Every tear she's shed in interviews, every nostalgic story she's shared about Elvis, every appearance she's made as the keeper of his legacy, it's all been part of a carefully orchestrated performance designed to maximize her own power and wealth. The truth about Priscilla Presley isn't romantic or touching. It's the story of a woman who learned early that love is weakness and relationships are tools. She spent her entire adult life proving that calculation beats emotion, that strategy trumps authenticity, and that the person who controls the narrative controls everything. Elvis may have been the king of rock and roll, but Priscilla became the queen of manipulation, and she's been ruling that throne for over 50 years. The scandals in her dating history aren't just gossip. They're a masterclass in how to use people and discard them while maintaining plausible deniability. The truth about Priscilla Presley's love life reveals a woman far more calculating than anyone imagined. What other secrets are hiding in plain sight? Subscribe and hit that notification bell because next week, we're exposing the real reason Lisa Marie Presley never forgave her mother. You won't want to miss it.
It was kind of an out-of-body experience to begin with. What, Elvis? Hello, you know? It was a strange thing. I mean, how do you end up dating Elvis? I mean, it's so surreal.
What I'm about to tell you will completely shatter everything you thought you knew about Elvis Presley and the women in his life. Because while the world was watching Elvis with Linda Thompson, thinking they were this perfect couple, Elvis was already deep into a secret affair that would expose just how manipulative and calculating the king of rock and roll really was. Sheila Ryan wasn't just some random woman who caught Elvis's eye. She was a deliberate choice, a calculated move by a man who had mastered the art of living multiple lives. And here's the part that will blow your mind. Elvis started pursuing Sheila while he was still very much committed to Linda Thompson. Not after they broke up, not during some innocent break in their relationship. While Linda was at Graceland, believing she was the only woman in Elvis's world, Elvis was already laying the groundwork for his next conquest. The timeline alone should tell you everything you need to know about Elvis's character. Linda Thompson had been by his side for 4 years, watching over him, sacrificing her own life to keep him alive through his darkest moments. She was literally staying awake nights to make sure he didn't die from his drug cocktails. And during this time, when Linda was proving her loyalty in the most extreme way possible, Elvis was secretly meeting Sheila Ryan. But here's where it gets really twisted. Elvis didn't just stumble into this affair, he orchestrated it like a master manipulator. He knew exactly what he was doing when he started showering Sheila with gifts in that very first week. A car, expensive clothes, promises of a life she'd never imagined. This wasn't love at first sight. This was a calculated campaign to secure another woman's devotion while keeping Linda trapped in her caretaker role. Think about how cold and calculating this really was. Elvis needed Linda Thompson because she was willing to watch him die slowly, to sacrifice her own sleep and sanity to keep him breathing through the night. But Linda came with emotional baggage. She was starting to crack under the pressure, starting to confront him about his drug use. So what does Elvis do? Instead of getting clean, instead of addressing the real problems in his life, he starts building his backup plan. Sheila Ryan was that backup plan. Young, impressionable, and completely overwhelmed by the fantasy of dating Elvis Presley. She admitted herself that it felt unreal, like something that couldn't possibly be happening to her. And Elvis knew exactly how to exploit that feeling of disbelief. He made her feel chosen, special, like she was the only woman who truly understood him.
But here's the sickest part. Elvis was telling both women the same lies. He was making Linda believe she was irreplaceable, while simultaneously making Sheila believe she was his future. He was living this double life so seamlessly that neither woman had any idea what was really happening. Linda thought those nights away from Graceland were just Elvis being Elvis, needing his space. She had no clue that her space was being filled by another woman who was getting the same promises, the same gifts, the same manipulation. The affair wasn't just about Elvis wanting another woman. It was about Elvis needing to feel in control when everything else in his life was spiraling. His health was deteriorating. His career was becoming more demanding, and the people around him were starting to question his choices. But with Sheila, he could start fresh. He could be the generous, charming Elvis without all the complicated history and growing resentment. What makes this even more disturbing is how Elvis used his fame and power to keep this secret. Sheila was so overwhelmed by the experience of dating Elvis Presley that she couldn't see the manipulation happening right in front of her. She was so focused on the unreality of it all that she missed the very real damage Elvis was causing to everyone around him, including her. And Linda? Linda was so committed to saving Elvis's life that she couldn't see he was already planning her replacement. While she was checking his breathing in the middle of the night, making sure he survived another day, Elvis was building a relationship with the woman who would eventually take her place. This wasn't just an affair. It was a betrayal that exposed Elvis's true character. A man so selfish and manipulative that he would rather juggle 2 women than face his own demons. A man who used love as a weapon to get what he wanted, when he wanted it, with no regard for the destruction he was causing. But what Elvis didn't realize was that this secret affair would ultimately destroy not just his relationships, but his ability to trust or be trusted by anyone. Because once you cross that line, once you prove you're capable of that level of deception, there's no going back. Now that you know Elvis was living this double life, you need to understand what was actually happening when he was alone with Sheila Ryan. Because what went on behind closed doors wasn't just an affair. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation that would make your skin crawl. Elvis had perfected the art of making women feel like they were the center of his universe, while simultaneously making them completely dependent on him. With Sheila, he took this manipulation to a whole new level. Those expensive gifts he showered her with in the first week, they weren't gestures of love. They were chains disguised as jewelry.
Here's what Elvis would do. He'd disappear from Linda's side, telling her he needed space to think or work on music. But instead of going to the studio or taking time for himself, he was with Sheila, creating this fantasy world where she was his everything. He'd take her to private locations where no one could see them, places where he could control every aspect of their interaction. And in these secret meetings, Elvis would pour out his heart to Sheila about how misunderstood he was, how lonely his life had become, how everyone around him just wanted something from him. He painted Linda as someone who was becoming too clingy, too demanding about his drug use. He made Sheila believe she was saving him from a relationship that was suffocating him. But here's the twisted part. While Elvis was telling Sheila that Linda was the problem, he was going home to Linda and complaining about the pressures of fame, the demanding schedule, the people who didn't understand his creative process. He was using both women as emotional dumping grounds while making each of them feel like they were his savior. The gifts Elvis gave Sheila weren't just expensive, they were strategic. Every car, every piece of jewelry, every designer outfit came with an unspoken message: "You owe me." Elvis knew exactly how to make someone feel special while simultaneously making them feel obligated. Sheila later admitted that she felt like she couldn't leave because of everything Elvis had given her. That wasn't an accident, that was the plan. Elvis would also use his fame as a weapon in their private moments. He'd tell Sheila secrets about other celebrities, share stories about his experiences that made her feel like she was part of an exclusive club. He made her believe that being with him gave her access to a world that ordinary people could never understand. But what he was really doing was isolating her from reality, making her normal life seem small and meaningless by comparison. The most disturbing part of their secret relationship was how Elvis used Sheila's inexperience against her. She was young, impressionable, and completely overwhelmed by his attention. Elvis knew this, and he exploited it ruthlessly. He would make promises about their future together, talking about marriage and a life beyond the chaos of his current situation. But these promises always came with conditions. She had to be patient. She had to understand that timing was everything. She had to trust him completely. What Elvis was really doing was training Sheila to accept secrecy as proof of their special bond. He convinced her that their hidden relationship was more real and meaningful than his public one with Linda. He made her believe that the sneaking around, the lies, the deception were all romantic rather than what they actually were. Signs of a man who had no respect for anyone's feelings but his own.
Behind closed doors, Elvis also revealed just how paranoid and controlling he really was. He would quiz Sheila about who she'd talked to, what she'd said, whether she'd mentioned him to anyone. He made her promise to keep their relationship completely secret, not just from Linda, but from everyone in her life. He isolated her from her friends and family by making her feel like they wouldn't understand what she was going through. Elvis even used his health problems as manipulation tools with Sheila. He would have episodes where he seemed particularly vulnerable, moments where he'd talk about how much he needed someone who truly cared about him, not just someone who was there out of obligation, like Linda had become. He made Sheila feel like she was the only person who could truly save him, the only one who understood his real needs. But the cruelest manipulation of all was how Elvis made Sheila complicit in his deception. He didn't just ask her to keep their relationship secret. He made her an active participant in lying to Linda. There were times when Linda would call while Elvis was with Sheila, and Elvis would signal for complete silence, while he lied to Linda about where he was and what he was doing. He was forcing Sheila to watch him deceive another woman, making her an accomplice in the very betrayal that would eventually be turned on her. What Elvis created with Sheila wasn't love. It was a carefully constructed prison made of luxury and lies, where every gift came with invisible strings attached, and every intimate moment was really just another step in his plan to control every aspect of her life. Every lie has a breaking point, and Elvis's carefully constructed web of deception was about to collapse in the most devastating way possible, because when secrets this big finally surface, they don't just hurt the people involved,
they destroy them completely. Linda Thompson's discovery of Elvis's affair with Sheila Ryan wasn't just a betrayal. It was the shattering of everything she thought she knew about the man she'd sacrificed 4 years of her life to save. Imagine staying awake night after night, literally watching someone breathe to make sure they don't die, believing you're the most important person in their world, only to discover they've been building an entire relationship with someone else while you were fighting to keep them alive. The moment Linda realized what had been happening, something broke inside her that could never be repaired. It wasn't just about Elvis being with another woman. It was about realizing that while she was giving everything she had to save his life, he was investing his energy in manipulating someone else. Every night she'd spent checking his pulse, every moment she'd sacrificed her own needs for his, had been happening while Elvis was promising another woman the future Linda thought was hers.
But here's what made Linda's pain even worse. She started connecting the dots about all those times Elvis had claimed he needed space. All those mysterious disappearances that she'd attributed to his artistic temperament or his need for solitude. She realized that her compassion and understanding had been used as cover for his deception. Her willingness to give him space had literally enabled his betrayal. For Sheila, the truth was equally devastating, but in a completely different way. She'd been living in this bubble where she believed she was special, chosen, the woman who would finally understand Elvis in a way no one else ever had. But when the affair became public, she realized she wasn't special at all. She was just another woman in Elvis's pattern of manipulation and control. The gifts that had made Sheila feel so valued suddenly became symbols of her own participation in someone else's destruction. Every car Elvis had bought her, every expensive outfit, every piece of jewelry, they all represented Linda's pain. Sheila realized she'd been wearing the evidence of another woman's betrayal, driving around in cars bought with money that should have been invested in Elvis's relationship with the woman who was literally keeping him alive. But the worst part for Sheila was realizing how completely she'd been played. All those intimate conversations where Elvis had opened up about his loneliness, his need for understanding, his dissatisfaction with Linda. She now understood these weren't genuine confessions. They were calculated manipulations designed to make her feel special while justifying his betrayal of Linda. Elvis's paranoia and drug use spiraled completely out of control once his deception was exposed. The man who had thought he could manage 2 relationships simultaneously suddenly couldn't handle the emotional chaos he'd created. His addiction wasn't just about physical dependency anymore. It became his escape from the guilt and shame of what he'd done to both women. The psychological pressure of maintaining his lies had been eating away at Elvis's mental health for months. Now that the truth was out, he didn't have the manipulative games to distract him from his real problems. He couldn't use Sheila as an escape from Linda's concerns about his health, and he couldn't use Linda's devotion as proof that he was still worthy of love, despite his treatment of Sheila. Both women began to see Elvis's so-called generosity for what it really was, a control mechanism designed to make them feel indebted to him. Linda realized that Elvis's gifts to her had always come with the expectation that she would overlook his increasingly destructive behavior. Sheila understood that her expensive presents were actually payments for her silence and complicity in his deception. Linda Thompson's silence was bought with different currency. She was already moving on with her life, building a new career, and she was pressured to keep quiet about the affair to avoid damaging her own reputation. The implicit message was clear. If you want to move forward, you don't drag Elvis's memory through the mud, even if he deserves it. What really ended the affair wasn't love or conscience. It was Elvis's complete inability to handle the emotional complexity he'd created. When both women started demanding honesty and accountability, Elvis chose his drugs over trying to repair the damage. He literally chose self-destruction
over taking responsibility for his actions. The lasting impact on Sheila and Linda was devastating in ways the public never understood. Both women struggled with trust issues for years afterward. They'd been so thoroughly manipulated by someone they loved that they questioned their own judgment about relationships for decades. Linda has spoken carefully about her time with Elvis, but she's never fully revealed the extent of his psychological manipulation. Sheila took most of her secrets to the grave. This story matters because it exposes the dark side of celebrity worship and how fame can be weaponized to exploit genuine human emotions. Elvis wasn't just a man struggling with addiction. He was someone who used his power to systematically manipulate women who genuinely cared about him. The truth they never wanted you to know is that Elvis Presley wasn't destroyed by drugs alone. He was destroyed by his own cruelty, his inability to love anyone more than he loved his own ego and control. If this story shocked you, you need to subscribe right now, because I've uncovered even more devastating secrets about Elvis's relationships that will completely change how you see the king of rock and roll. Hit that notification bell. You won't believe what's coming next.
I have a child. What do? He was so afraid to hold her. I think a lot of men feel that way, but he was so frightened that he would drop her. I didn't know how to hold her. So this was a really happy time.
It began with a headline no one expected to read. Priscilla Presley breaks silence, the truth about Elvis's legacy. Those 12 words hit the internet like a thunderclap. Within hours, news anchors were replaying her interviews, fans were arguing across social media, and Graceland's gates filled once again with reporters asking the same question. What is Priscilla really doing now? For nearly half a century, Priscilla Presley has been both the guardian and the lightning rod of Elvis's legacy. But this time, even her most loyal supporters say she's crossed a line. Some call it courage, others call it betrayal. Whatever you believe, one thing is certain. She has just reopened the deepest wound in the Presley family story.
The spark came from a new interview, calm, deliberate, almost too composed, where Priscilla revealed something that made even longtime Elvis historians pause. She claimed that parts of Elvis's public image were carefully edited, that some stories were never told truthfully, and that it's time people hear what really happened.
To the casual listener, it might have sounded like a woman defending her late husband. But to those who've followed the Presley family battles since Lisa Marie's death, it sounded like something else entirely. A warning shot. Because behind that soft tone was a message layered in years of frustration. Priscilla wants to control how Elvis is remembered, and she's no longer asking permission to do it. Fans flooded the comment sections. She's rewriting history. Others defended her. She lived it. She has the right. The divide was instant. Believers on one side, skeptics on the other, both shouting over a story that refuses to die. And maybe that's what keeps pulling the world back to this family. The way their private heartbreaks somehow mirror our own questions about fame, power, and truth. Priscilla's latest revelation didn't come out of nowhere. It's the continuation of a struggle that's been quietly simmering since Lisa Marie's passing. One that turned courtrooms into battlefields and family dinners into silence. When Priscilla fought for control over her daughter's estate, the world thought it was about money. But now, some wonder if it was about something far more personal. Authorship. The right to decide who tells the story of Elvis Presley. And this time, the stakes aren't just financial. They're emotional, generational, even spiritual. Because in her latest statements, Priscilla spoke not only about her marriage to Elvis, but about what she called his misunderstood faith, his purpose, his fears. She hinted at private moments that until now were off limits. Letters, conversations, confessions. Things she claims could change the way people see the man behind the music. The internet did what it always does. Dissected every word, every pause, every look. One side said it was exploitation. The other said it was liberation. And somewhere in the middle were millions of fans, torn between wanting to know the truth and wishing the past would finally rest. But if there's one thing Priscilla Presley has proven, it's that the past never really rests. Not in Memphis, not at Graceland, not when the ghosts still have something left to say. Those close to her describe a woman who feels misunderstood, who believes that she, more than anyone, carried the weight of Elvis's fame long after his death. While the world adored the king, she dealt with the chaos behind the crown, the loneliness, the pills, the nights when love blurred into survival. And maybe this is her way of reclaiming that story, of saying, "I was there too." Still, every time Priscilla speaks, another memory cracks open. Another question rises. Why now? Why stir all this again when peace seemed within reach? Some insiders believe she's preparing a new documentary, one meant to set the record straight. Others whisper that private Presley letters have surfaced, containing details no one outside the family has ever seen. Whatever the truth is, Priscilla's sudden openness feels deliberate, even strategic, as if she's moving pieces on a board most of us don't even see. And that's where the tension lives, between memory and myth, between love and legacy. Because every time Priscilla re-enters the spotlight, the world has to ask, is she defending Elvis or defending herself? The headlines say one thing, the fans say another. But deep down, the question cutting through it all is simpler and colder. Is this really about honoring the king, or about rewriting the kingdom he left behind? Because once again, Priscilla Presley has stepped out of the shadows. And this time, she's not just part of Elvis's story. She's challenging who gets to tell it. And the shockwaves of that decision are only beginning to spread. When Lisa Marie Presley died in early 2023, the world grieved for the daughter of the king. But inside the Presley family, grief quickly turned into something colder. A quiet war over control, memory, and power. And at the center of it all stood Priscilla Presley. She had just buried her only child, yet within weeks she was making headlines again, not for mourning, but for filing a legal petition that challenged Lisa Marie's will. The document named Riley Keough, Lisa's eldest daughter, as the sole trustee of the family estate, including Graceland itself. But Priscilla claimed something was off. Signatures that didn't look right, dates that didn't add up, pages that were missing the formal witnesses required by law. To the tabloids, it looked like greed. To Priscilla, it looked like protection. Those close to her insist she wasn't chasing money. She was chasing control, the one thing she'd been losing piece by piece since Elvis died. For decades, she'd watched others profit off his image, films, tours, holograms, often without her say. The will challenge, they say, was her last line of defense, a way to make sure the Presley legacy stayed in the family, even if that meant tearing the family apart. Riley Keough, on the other hand, saw it differently. She had just lost her mother and was now facing her grandmother across a courtroom. Friends described their relationship as icy and painful. With lawyers speaking more than either woman did, Priscilla insisted it was never meant to be a battle. Just business, she told reporters. But every document filed, every whisper leaked, made it clear this was personal. Behind closed doors, Memphis insiders said Graceland had turned from a home into a fortress. Staff didn't know which side to speak to. Even the house tour guides were told to avoid mentioning the situation. The air around the Presley name was thick with tension. One wrong sentence could end a career. Meanwhile, the public watched in confusion. For years, Priscilla had been seen as the calm matriarch who kept Elvis's image pristine, appearing at every anniversary and tribute event with measured grace. Now she was being painted as the antagonist in her own family's saga, the woman trying to wrestle control from her grieving granddaughter. And yet, for every critic who called her manipulative, another voice rose to defend her. "She built this," one fan wrote online. "Elvis wouldn't be who he is today without Priscilla keeping the flame alive." That defense carried weight. After all, when Elvis died in 1977, his finances were in ruins. It was Priscilla who helped turn Graceland into a global landmark, who managed licensing deals, who made the Presley name profitable again. Without her, the legacy might have faded decades ago. But something about this moment felt different. Maybe because Lisa Marie's death reopened wounds that never really healed. The years of distance between mother and daughter, the resentment over decisions made in Elvis's name, the old arguments about who truly understood him. To outsiders, it looked like a legal dispute. To insiders, it felt like revenge disguised as responsibility. Friends say Priscilla struggled privately with the public backlash. She felt abandoned, one source said, like everyone forgot how much she sacrificed. She'd spent her life walking a thin line, honored as the keeper of Elvis's memory, yet blamed for everything that went wrong after him. Now, even that purpose seemed to be slipping away. When the court finally approved a settlement months later, Riley Keough emerged as the new official heir to Graceland. Priscilla accepted a smaller financial arrangement and an honorary title. Publicly, both women smiled for the cameras. But those who know them say the truce was fragile, more performance than peace. Because beneath the signatures and statements, something deeper was shifting. Priscilla had realized she was no longer the unquestioned voice of the Presley story. The power she once wielded over Elvis's name, image, and memory was being rewritten by a new generation. And to her, that loss was more painful than any financial cut. That's when her tone began to change. She started giving interviews again, carefully, selectively, reminding audiences that she was there when history happened. She spoke of moments the movies never showed, of conversations only she could recall. Some fans heard nostalgia, others heard a warning. Priscilla wasn't stepping back. She was reclaiming the microphone. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The woman who once tried to escape the shadow of Elvis was now fighting to keep her place inside it. And while some saw this as tragic, others saw it as inevitable. Because the Presley legacy has always been built on tension, love, and control. Myth and truth. For years, she'd watched others profit from Elvis's story, films written by people who never met him, documentaries narrated by strangers, dramatizations twisting private pain into glossy entertainment. And now, with one cryptic statement, she'd taken the story back into her hands. Those who've seen pieces of the letters describe them as raw, glimpses of a man wrestling with guilt, questioning the cost of fame, and mourning the quiet he could never find. One allegedly ends with the line, "Priscilla, if they ever tell my story, make sure they tell it right." If true, that sentence changes everything. It turns Priscilla from bystander to gatekeeper, from grieving ex-wife to chosen messenger. And maybe that's exactly how she wants it. But not everyone's buying it. Critics accuse her of timing these discoveries too conveniently. Right as new Elvis projects emerge, and just when her influence was starting to fade, they say she's not honoring him. She's using him. And yet, for all the skepticism, there's something hauntingly believable about her. You can see it in her eyes when she talks about him, the mix of reverence and resentment that only true love leaves behind. Because whether you adore her or doubt her, one thing is undeniable. No one knew Elvis like Priscilla did. She lived the chaos. She saw the man behind the myth, the sleepless nights, the loneliness masked by laughter, the slow unraveling beneath the spotlight. And maybe those letters, real or not, are her way of saying, "You've heard everyone else's version, now you'll hear mine." But the risk is enormous. Once those words are public, there's no taking them back. Whatever image the world has of Elvis, saint or sinner, savior or lost soul, could fracture forever, and Priscilla knows that. Which means, if she's going through with it, she believes the world deserves to know something it's not ready to hear. Some say the letters hint that Elvis foresaw his downfall, that he wrote about the toll fame was taking on his body, the growing distance between himself and God, the paranoia that shadowed him in his final months. Others claim they reveal his attempts to reconcile with Priscilla, to fix what fame had broken. If any of that is true, these letters aren't just history. They're confession. And that's why they're dangerous. Because once confession becomes content, the line between truth and theater disappears, and the people who loved him most become characters in their own tragedy. So when Priscilla says, "It's time people know the truth," the world holds its breath. Because truth, in the Presley story, always comes with a cost. The last time she opened the vault, Elvis's reputation changed forever. This time it could rewrite his soul. And somewhere out there, as fans wait and speculate, one question echoes louder than all the rest. If these letters really exist, are they meant to honor Elvis Presley, or to finally remind the world that Priscilla Presley still holds the key to his legacy? Graceland has always been more than a house. It's a monument built from memory, a place where fans come not just to honor Elvis, but to feel closer to something pure, something eternal. But lately, the air around it feels different. What once stood for love and legacy now feels like a battleground, divided between what Elvis left behind and what people are still trying to claim. Ever since Priscilla's latest revelation, the quiet streets outside Graceland have been buzzing again. News trucks parked by the gates, fans holding signs that read, "Let Elvis rest," while others shout, "We deserve the truth." It's a strange kind of loyalty, half reverence, half rebellion, all centered on a man who's been gone for nearly 50 years. Inside those iron gates, the family story that began in love now ripples with distrust. Riley Keough may hold the legal rights, but Priscilla still holds the emotional crown, the authority of memory. She's the last voice from the original era, the one who saw the rise and the fall, the woman who watched Elvis transform from a dreamer into a myth. But every time she speaks, that myth shifts just a little. And that's what frightens people most. Because the Presley legacy isn't just family property, it's cultural scripture. When Priscilla questions it, it shakes something sacred to fans. She's rewriting not just history, but hope. They want Elvis to remain untouchable, pure, heroic, eternal. But Priscilla keeps reminding the world that behind the voice and the jumpsuits was a man, vulnerable, restless, searching for redemption. In her latest statement, she said, "People forget, Elvis wasn't just the king of rock and roll. He was a man who carried the weight of every soul that believed in him." That line echoed through fan communities, igniting another wave of debate. Was she humanizing him or dismantling his divinity? What makes it harder to untangle is the timing. New biopics, documentaries, and even a rumored Graceland series are in the works. Each version retells the same story in a different light, and each one competes for emotional ownership. To the public, this might look like entertainment, but to Priscilla, it's invasion, strangers carving up a life she once lived. Those who've worked with her say this is the fight of her life, not for money, but for authorship. Because when legends die, what's left to protect isn't the person, it's the narrative. And every person close to Elvis, from old bandmates to business partners, has tried to claim a piece of that truth. Maybe Priscilla just refuses to let anyone else speak louder than her. But there's a deeper cost. Each new revelation pushes the Presley family further from peace. The more Priscilla talks, the more fans question her motives. The more she defends, the more they accuse. And somewhere in the middle, the real story of a love that began with two dreamers from Memphis gets lost beneath headlines and speculation. The saddest part? The person who could have bridged that gap, Lisa Marie, is gone. She understood both sides. She loved her father, but she also carried her mother's scars. Now, without her, the Presley legacy feels like a puzzle missing its centerpiece. Still, there's something undeniably human about Priscilla's persistence. She's 80 years old, yet still fighting to be heard in a world that would rather label her than listen. Some call her stubborn, others call her brave. But beneath all the noise, her voice carries something familiar. The same defiance Elvis once had when he stood against an industry trying to mold him. In that way, she might be the last reflection of the man she loved. As time moves on, Graceland will continue to draw millions. Tourists snapping photos, fans leaving roses, dreamers standing in silence. But the truth is, Graceland was never just Elvis's home. It was a mirror of everyone who walked through its gates, each visitor carrying their own version of who he was. And now, Priscilla Presley is forcing the world to decide which version it wants to believe. Because legacies don't die, they just change hands. And sometimes the hardest part isn't keeping a legend alive, it's deciding who gets to speak for it. Maybe that's the tragedy and the triumph of the Presley story. That even in death, Elvis still pulls people toward him. Not just through his music, but through the battles over what that music meant. The truth, the myth, the man, the memory, all still fighting for space under one name. And standing in the center, as she always has, is Priscilla, the woman who once loved him, lost him, and now dares to tell the world that even legends have shadows. What do you think? Is Priscilla protecting Elvis's truth, or rewriting it to protect herself? Share your thoughts below, because this story isn't over. And in the Presley family, every secret has a sequel. Stay tuned. The next revelation might change everything we thought we knew.
He was so quick-witted and very vulnerable. I just thought he was the funniest, sweetest guy I'd ever met.
It's March 15th, 2024, and Sharon Osbourne is about to receive the phone call that will destroy everything she thought she knew about her husband's life, career, and the empire they built together. She's sitting in her Beverly Hills office, probably going through the usual business of managing what's left of Ozzy's legacy, when her assistant buzzes in. "Sharon, it's Dr. Richardson from Cedars-Sinai. He says it's urgent about Ozzy's test results. Now, Sharon's been dealing with Ozzy's health issues for years. Parkinson's, the tremors, the slurred speech. She thought she'd heard every piece of bad news the medical world could throw at them. But when Dr. Richardson's voice comes through that speaker, something's different. There's a weight to his words that makes Sharon's blood run cold. "Sharon, we need to talk. What we found in Ozzy's recent neurological assessments, it changes everything we thought we knew about his condition." "What do you mean changes everything?" Sharon asks, and you can hear the defensiveness creeping into her voice. After decades of protecting Ozzy from the world and the world from Ozzy, her first instinct is always to circle the wagons. But Dr. Richardson doesn't back down. "Sharon, I've been reviewing Ozzy's medical history going back 40 years. The records from his early tours, the psychiatric evaluations from the 80s, even the brain scans from his ATV accident. And I need to ask you something directly. How much of Ozzy's erratic behavior was actually medical, and how much of it was manufactured?" The line goes dead quiet. Sharon Osbourne, the woman who built her reputation on never being speechless, can't form words. "Because what I'm seeing here," Dr. Richardson continues, "suggests that your husband has been medically capable of far more cognitive function than anyone realized. The Parkinson's is real, but it's recent. The tremors, the confusion, the episodes that made headlines for decades." John Michael Osbourne was actually one of the most methodical, intelligent, and creatively sophisticated artists Marcus had ever worked with. Behind closed doors, away from the cameras and the crowds, Ozzy was writing symphonies. He was composing pieces that would have made Mozart weep. He was creating art that transcended every boundary the music industry had built around him. But here's the twisted part. That version of Ozzy didn't sell records. The real Ozzy, the brilliant Ozzy, the Ozzy who could sit at a piano and bring grown men to tears with his compositions, wasn't marketable. He wasn't the brand they'd built. He wasn't the product that had made everyone around him rich. So they made a choice. Marcus, the label executives, even some of Ozzy's own management team, they decided to kill the artist and keep the character alive. When Dr. Richardson explains all this to Sharon, when he tells her that Marcus Webb has medical records, audio recordings, and documentation proving that her husband's greatest performances weren't his wildest moments on stage, but his most intimate moments in private studios, where he thought no one was listening, Sharon realizes something horrifying. Ozzy Osbourne, the artist, the real creative genius behind the madman mask, had been dead for decades, and she'd been married to his ghost. Sharon, Dr. Richardson says quietly, your husband didn't just survive everything that should have killed him. He survived something worse. He survived having his true self systematically destroyed by the people who claim to love him most. The phone goes dead, and Sharon Osbourne sits in her Beverly Hills office, staring at the walls covered with gold records and photos of the man she thought she knew, finally understanding that everything she'd built her life around was a lie. The king of heavy metal was dead. The question was, could they bring the artist back to life? Let me take you back to 1982, to a conference room at CBS Records in New York City, where the most calculated character assassination in music history was about to begin.
Walter pops the tape into his player, and for the next 10 minutes, they listen to Ozzy playing a piece he called Birmingham Lament, a haunting melody about growing up poor in industrial England, played with the kind of technical skill that would have made classical musicians weep with envy. When the music stops, Walter leans back in his chair and looks Marcus dead in the eye. How many people have heard this? Just me and the sound engineer. Ozzy doesn't even know I recorded it. He was just messing around after everyone left. That's when Walter Yetnikoff made the decision that would haunt him for the rest of his career. Instead of celebrating the discovery of Ozzy's hidden genius, instead of realizing they'd found something that could elevate popular music to entirely new heights, Walter saw a threat. Marcus, let me explain something to you about this business. We didn't sign Ozzy Osbourne, the piano player. We signed the Prince of Darkness. We signed the guy who bites heads off bats, who pisses on the Alamo, who makes parents across America terrified for their children's souls. That guy sells records. That guy fills stadiums. That guy makes us rich. Walter stands up and walks to the window overlooking Manhattan. This beautiful music you just played me, this thoughtful, intelligent, sophisticated Ozzy, he's box office poison. He's everything our audience doesn't want to see. He's the death of our brand. But Walter, this could change everything. This could show the world that heavy metal isn't just noise, that our artists aren't just drug-addled idiots. This could legitimize the entire genre. Walter turns around, and Marcus later said the look in his eyes was pure ice. Marcus, legitimacy doesn't sell. Controversy sells. Chaos sells. Fear sells. We're not in the business of changing the world. We're in the business of making money off the world exactly as it is. That's when Walter outlined what he called the preservation protocol. From that moment forward, any evidence of Ozzy's real artistic capabilities would be suppressed. Studio sessions would be monitored. Private recording time would be eliminated. Even Ozzy's access to instruments other than guitars would be restricted during official recording sessions. But it gets worse. Walter didn't just want to hide Ozzy's genius, he wanted to actively enhance the madman persona. He assigned a team of handlers whose job was to encourage Ozzy's most destructive behaviors. They weren't trying to help him manage his demons. They were trying to feed them. Marcus was horrified, but he was also a company man. When Walter offered him a promotion and a significant raise to oversee Project Ozzy, Marcus made the choice that would haunt him for 40 years. He said yes. Over the next 2 years, Marcus watched as they systematically destroyed every piece of evidence that Ozzy Osbourne was anything more than a barely functional rock star. Compositions were erased. Piano recordings were destroyed. Even Ozzy's own band members were kept in the dark about his real capabilities. The truly diabolical part was how they convinced Ozzy himself that his artistic instincts were wrong. Whenever he'd try to incorporate more sophisticated elements into his music, whenever he'd suggest a ballad or a complex arrangement, his own team would tell him it wasn't what his fans wanted. They made him believe that dumbing down his music was the only way to stay relevant. And it worked. The more they suppressed Ozzy's artistic growth, the more successful he became commercially. Bark at the Moon goes platinum. Shot in the Dark becomes a massive hit. The crazier the persona got, the bigger the sales numbers became. Marcus kept detailed notes of everything, partly from guilt, partly from self-preservation. He documented every meeting, every decision, every moment when they chose profit over artistry. He kept copies of the destroyed recordings, the suppressed compositions, even Ozzy's personal journals where he wrote about feeling trapped by his own success. By 1987, the transformation was complete. Ozzy Osbourne, the artist, was dead, and Ozzy Osbourne, the product, was everything CBS Records wanted him to be. Profitable, predictable, and completely controllable. The genius was still in there, but it was buried so deep that even Ozzy himself had forgotten it existed. Until 2019, when something happened that nobody saw coming. The artist was about to fight back. It's January 2019, and Ozzy Osbourne is supposed to be planning his farewell tour. Instead, he's sitting alone in a private studio in Malibu at 3 in the morning, doing something he hasn't done in 37 years. Creating music that comes from his soul instead of his brand. What nobody knew, what Sharon didn't know, what his management team couldn't have imagined, was that Ozzy's Parkinson's diagnosis had triggered something unexpected. Instead of crushing his spirit, it had liberated it. For the first time since the early 80s, John Michael Osbourne was staring at his own mortality, and he realized he had nothing left to lose. The tremors in his hands made it impossible to play guitar the way he used to, but they didn't affect his ability to compose. So Ozzy started doing what he'd been forbidden from doing for decades. He started writing real music. The first piece he completed was called Letters to John, a 23-minute orchestral composition about the boy from Birmingham who dreamed of making beautiful music before the world convinced him that beautiful wasn't profitable. He followed it with Sharon's Lullaby, a piano piece so tender and heartbreaking that when he played it alone in that studio, tears were streaming down his face. For 6 months, Ozzy worked in complete secrecy. He'd tell Sharon he was going to physical therapy, but instead, he'd drive to this rented studio space and pour his heart into compositions that would have shocked the world. This wasn't heavy metal. This wasn't the Prince of Darkness. This was the artist that CBS Records had murdered 40 years earlier, fighting his way back to life. By July 2019, Ozzy had completed an entire album, 14 tracks of the most sophisticated, emotionally complex music of his career. He called it The Real Me, and it was everything his handlers had spent decades preventing him from creating. But Ozzy made a crucial mistake. He trusted the wrong person. Kevin Morrison was Ozzy's new A&R representative, assigned to help coordinate his farewell tour. Kevin seemed different from the usual industry vultures. Younger, more passionate about artistry over commerce. When Ozzy played him some rough cuts from The Real Me, Kevin's reaction was everything Ozzy had hoped for. "This is incredible," Kevin told him. "This is the most important music you've ever made. We have to get this out there. This changes everything." What Ozzy didn't know was that Kevin Morrison was Walter Yetnikoff's nephew, and Kevin had been specifically placed in Ozzy's camp to watch for exactly this kind of situation. Within 24 hours of hearing those tracks, Kevin was on the phone with his uncle. "We have a problem. Ozzy's gone completely off-brand.
He's recorded classical music. He's written ballads. He's created art that completely destroys the persona we've built. Walter, now in his 80s but still ruthlessly protective of his legacy, didn't hesitate. Kill it. Kill all of it. And make sure this never happens again. What happened next was the most sophisticated character assassination in entertainment history. Walter's team didn't just suppress the album. They launched a carefully orchestrated campaign to make the world believe that Ozzy was losing his mind. Suddenly, reports started appearing in the tabloids about Ozzy's cognitive decline. Anonymous sources close to the family spoke about his increasingly erratic behavior and troubling episodes of confusion. Medical experts who had never examined Ozzy began speculating publicly about his mental state. The genius of it was that they used his real Parkinson's diagnosis as cover for their lies. Every tremor became evidence of mental deterioration. Every moment of fatigue became proof that he was losing his grip on reality. They painted a picture of a man whose brain was failing him, which made it easy to dismiss any artistic output as the confused ramblings of a sick mind.
Sharon, watching her husband seemingly deteriorate before her eyes, became their unwitting accomplice. When Ozzy tried to explain about his secret album, about the music that meant more to him than anything he'd ever created, Sharon gently dismissed it as confusion brought on by his medication. Ozzy, honey, you're not thinking clearly. You need to focus on your health, not on some imaginary recording project. The cruelest part was that they convinced Ozzy himself that his artistic renaissance was a symptom of his disease. His own doctors, paid consultants of the record label, told him that his desire to create complex music was actually a form of cognitive dysfunction caused by his Parkinson's. By September 2019, Ozzy had stopped going to the studio. The master recordings of The Real Me were confiscated by his management team and locked away. The farewell tour was announced, framed as a heroic final stand by a man bravely battling degenerative illness. The artist was dead again, but this time they'd made sure he knew it was his own fault. For 4 years, Ozzy lived with the devastating belief that his greatest creative work was actually evidence of his mental decline. Until Marcus Webb's conscience finally got the better of him, and he decided to burn down everything he'd helped build. The resurrection was about to begin. March 22nd, 2024. 7 days after Dr. Richardson's phone call shattered Sharon's world, she's sitting in her living room with a stack of documents that Marcus Webb has just delivered personally. Medical records, audio recordings, internal CBS memos, and a handwritten letter from Ozzy that Marcus had kept hidden for 42 years. The letter, dated October 15, 1982, begins with 5 words that make Sharon's hands shake. "They're killing who I am." In his own handwriting, Ozzy had documented everything. How his handlers discouraged him from exploring musical complexity, how they rewarded his most destructive behaviors while punishing his artistic growth. "We have everything," Marcus tells Sharon. The original recordings from The Real Me. Master tapes of classical compositions from the 80s that were supposed to be destroyed. Even video footage of Ozzy playing piano pieces that would revolutionize how the world sees him. The question is, are you ready to let the real Ozzy Osbourne be reborn? Sharon looks up from the letter, and for the first time in decades, she sees her situation clearly. She's 71 years old, battling her own health issues, watching her husband suffer under the weight of a persona that was slowly suffocating his soul. She has a choice to make that will either destroy their legacy or transform it completely. "What are you proposing?" Marcus leans forward. "We release everything, not just the music, but the whole story. The suppression, the manipulation, the systematic destruction of one of music's greatest artistic minds. We show the world that Ozzy Osbourne wasn't just the Prince of Darkness. He was one of the most sophisticated composers of his generation, trapped inside a character that the industry created to sell records." "That would destroy everything we've built," Sharon says, but there's something different in her voice now.
something that sounds like hope. No, Marcus replies. It would destroy everything they built using Ozzy's name, but it would finally give birth to everything Ozzy actually created. On April 15th, 2024, Sharon Osbourne held a press conference that sent shockwaves through the music industry. Standing beside her were Marcus Webb, Dr. Richardson, and 3 of the world's leading musicologists who had spent months analyzing Ozzy's suppressed compositions. "The man you've known as Ozzy Osbourne," Sharon began, "died 40 years ago. Not physically, but artistically. What you've been watching since then has been an elaborate performance designed to hide one of the most tragic stories in music history, the systematic murder of a musical genius." Over the next hour, they played excerpts from The Real Me, the classical compositions from the 80s, and recordings that proved Ozzy's cognitive abilities were far beyond anything the public had been led to believe. Music critics who heard the materials described them as transcendent and revolutionary. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Within days, #RealOzzy was trending worldwide. Music scholars were calling for a complete re-evaluation of Ozzy's artistic legacy. Most importantly, Ozzy himself, for the first time in decades, felt free to be the artist he'd always been inside. The Prince of Darkness was dead. John Michael Osbourne, composer and musical genius, had finally been allowed to live. Ozzy Osbourne's death wasn't physical. It was the calculated murder of his artistic soul by an industry that valued profit over artistry. His resurrection came when the people who loved him most finally found the courage to tell the truth.
The king of heavy metal was gone. The artist had taken his place. What other artists do you think have had their true creative genius suppressed by the music industry? The Ozzy story might just be the tip of the iceberg. Drop your theories in the comments. Smash that subscribe button for more shocking music industry exposés, and hit the notification bell because you won't want to miss what we're uncovering next.